Okay, thank you for everyone for being with us today. Now, to conclude today's content, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Paul Holthus, founding president and CEO of the World Ocean Council, to introduce the final session and speakers. Paul, if I could welcome you to the stage, please. Staying for the session, possibly take your seats now, please. Thank you. I shall hand over to you.
Okay, we'll get going with the panel in a few minutes here. We're just getting our panelists with their microphones. If people could go ahead and finish getting their coffee and refreshments and take their seats, we'll get started in a few minutes. All right, thanks everyone for your patience. We are ready to go with the panel now. And so I'll invite the panelists to come on stage and take their seats, now that everyone has their microphones. So we have in the panel, I am Paul Holtus, the CEO of the World Ocean Council, the global Blue Economy Business and Investment Organization. And if we could have our panelists come on stage, we have Stuart Neal, Director of Strategy and Communications for the International Chamber of Shipping. We have myself, we have Catherine Palmer, who is the shipping lead for the UN High-Level Climate Champion Team. And we have Neil Robertson-Jones, Head of Corporate Banking for the National Bank of Fujairah. So if we could get the panelists to come on board. And go ahead and have a seat, and we'll take this forward from the seats here, and I'll join you in a minute there. So just by way of setting the stage quickly, if you've seen the notes, but just to reiterate here, so the UAE is hosting COP28 later this year, and hopefully all of you are familiar with the Conference of Parties for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and this has become the global gathering not only on climate change, but increasingly more broadly on sustainability issues. Maritime industries, shipping, and others are increasingly involved, and it's been a significant journey to bring the ocean and maritime issues and discussions to the climate change COP, and this year will be increasingly a part of the agenda, and in fact quite a movement underway to really have this year's COP in Dubai be really the blue COP, the ocean COP, and of course shipping and maritime will be a huge part of that. And just by kind of way of background as well, for me, I was involved personally involved when I was with the UN Environment Program back in the 80s and early 90s in the startup of the whole UNFCCC process and the initial COPs, and so it's been quite an amazing progression over the decades to see the world come together around climate change, which has been a great development, but also we've got a lot to do, and the process moves slowly but steadily forward. So with this focus on the UAE COP28 this year, we'll go ahead and start with the panel. And what I'll do, Stuart, we'll have you go first, and you've got some slides, and I think there's a slide controller there. Right, all right, so we'll start with Stuart Neal, Director of Strategy and Communications for the International Chamber of Shipping. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. I hope you're well and enjoying the event here in Dubai. Oh, too far already. So this, as we've heard, is a time of great change, and kind of understanding how leaders in our industry perceive these risks are pretty important to assess their confidence to overcome the challenges. And this is why the International Chamber of Shipping have surveyed 132 C-suite members of our community from across the world, and I'm pleased to announce that today is when we're unveiling the results. You can see some of it on the screen. So the top risks identified were political instability, financial instability, and cyber attacks, and that's a switch from 2021 when we undertook a sample survey, when epidemics, understandably, and supply chain fragility and trade barriers were the key concerns. And as financial and political risk has risen, so too has concerns about companies' ability and capability to manage these risks. But I'm pleased to say that the key takeaway from the report is that industry feels very, very confident about delivering on change. And the report also talks about the approach to zero carbon technologies, fuels, and they understand how to unlock that transition. And when it comes to the question of which fuels ships will be using in the future, as we look at COP and to our zero emission future, there's a wide range of views in terms of the fuel types and when we're likely to see these fuels in our industry. And we heard from our colleagues from ABS that there is a great deal of movement in terms of multiple options, but again, there's still a lot of not confusion, but interest in different fuel types. And that report, I'll give you the website later. You can download that and have a look at your own time. But I was asked to look not only at, as we look towards COP, but also to give a briefing on our clean energy marine hubs, which we're developing and working on at the moment. And I think it's important to think about scale and the scale of what we're actually looking at, because we often think ourselves in a little bubble, but the world is moving as well as the shipping industry, and that's very important. And we're talking about producers of low and zero emission fuels needing 6,000 terawatt hours of renewable capacity to produce these new fuels in a green way. Now this represents an 18-fold increase in the renewables that we have already to this day. So that's a massive scale up that we're going to need. And to give you some idea, shipping is going to need the entire world's renewables again. And that's a great opportunity, because that's change, right? And when we look at who's going to use these fuels, shipping only makes up a very small proportion of the demand. Possibly not really enough to drive the whole sector, but again, difficult when you're looking at multiple fuel choices as well. However, shipping will be required to transport 50% of all these new zero-emission fuels. And this is a massive opportunity for our industry if we get it right. So the Clean Energy Marine Hubs is about de-risking and aligning demand and supply so that producers can better plan, infrastructure can be built at the right time, including the development ports and the fleet to transport the fuels, and the demand sectors can invest, sure in the knowledge that they will be able to get the supply. And you can see from this graph from the World Energy Council that the UAE and the Gulf region are exceptionally well placed to capitalize on this transition, recognizing their leadership in renewables and those technologies. And we also look at the main drivers of demand initially being Japan, Korea, and parts of Europe. So again, well placed to move that forward. And following a summit of industry leaders that we hosted in London last year, and building on an event we held at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, a CEO-led task force was created to work on the practical initiative needed to de-risk these low and zero-emission fuel value chain. So ship owners joined forces with ports, with colleagues from the energy sector, classification societies, and the finance sector, and under direction of the CEO task force led by Esben Poulsen, our old chairman, and known to many of you here in the region. We've worked with the Clean Energy Ministerial. And the Clean Energy Ministerial is a global high-level governmental forum designed to advance the transition of the global energy economy. And it's made up of 28 countries, plus the EU. And the EU is a key member of government and minister in that approach. And this is where I need to recognize the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, because the UAE identified early the importance of this work and began championing it, along with Canada. So Norway, Panama, and Uruguay have now joined forces, and we're developing from the public sector side. The International Renewable Energy Agency at their ministerial assembly in January this year also announced that they wanted to help us develop this plan. And we're working now with the Ministry of Energy and those governments to develop the Clean Energy Marine Hubs initiative so that we can get the architecture right. We're working closely with the ministry along with other governments, and there will be a formal launch of this at the Clean Energy Ministerial in July. So work in progress, and keep your eyes out for that. So looking to COP28 here in Dubai, we will ensure that we bring a strong process to announce at that event with a grounding in real-world action. And to this end, we're planning to bring the marine and energy leadership together again, as we did in Glasgow and in London during during COP28 at the Museum of the Future, just along from here. Ideal venue to look at that, and also to bring people together in a way you can't always do within the negotiation format, and to catalyse action. And again, that's fully in line with the direction given from Sultan Al Jaber, your boss, I guess, Catherine? Not quite.
No.
So this is an exciting time for our industry. I'm sure we'll go on to talk, Paul, about other things that are going on in other fora as well. But again, understanding what's going on, we've heard that things are moving forward, and the industry is catalysing around understanding that change, and now we just need to de-risk that so that investments can start flowing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Great. Well, certainly the importance of decarbonization, the energy transition, and alternative fuels is really, I think, dominating correctly, appropriately, the climate discussions in and amongst the maritime industries of the world. But there's a lot more going on that fits into the broader climate and maritime, climate and ocean context. And so let me, as a speaker, take a few minutes to bring a few thoughts on that forward to you as we look at the broader context. So at the World Ocean Council, we work to bring together all of the ocean-related industries and the investment community around sustainable development in the ocean, and of course climate and ocean figures large in that. So I'd like to touch on 4 key areas here that for all of you to keep in mind as part of the broader climate and ocean industry context, and these are certainly issues and opportunities and developments that figure large in the COP process and will be, again, increasingly a part of the agenda of what happens here in Dubai late this year at COP28. So the first of these 4 broader ocean, maritime, and climate issues is CO2 reduction. You may have heard of the term blue carbon, and increasingly the term ocean CDR, carbon dioxide removal, or marine carbon dioxide removal, MCDR, are entering the lexicon. And so this refers to nature-based solutions, the opportunity, the possibility for natural systems to absorb and sequester and hold carbon out of the atmosphere. Blue carbon has been around longer. This refers to coastal ecosystems, mangroves and seagrass beds primarily, which have a significant potential to hold carbon for long periods of time, particularly in their soils, as the vegetation decomposes and builds up the soils. And this is significant. It's much greater than terrestrial-based sources of carbon sequestration. So forests and soils on land are important and can do a good job. They've captured most of the attention to date in terms of carbon sequestration. Blue carbon is moving forward rapidly as more and more projects get underway. But I'd really like to emphasize this ocean and marine, or marine as it's called, carbon dioxide removal. This is the open ocean systems that have by very far, the greatest potential to sequester carbon amongst natural systems. We're talking about gigaton potential via a variety of pathways. Maybe you've heard of some of these, kelp farming, algal farming, sinking the algae into deep ocean areas. There's ocean alkalinity enhancement that uses electrochemical processes to create additional enhanced carbon sequestration in the ocean. And this relies on renewable energy as well, which I'll come to in a minute. So these are really important opportunities for, and the most important opportunities for sequestering carbon. The ocean is central to this. And it's particularly valuable to those of you, all of you in the maritime industries, in that there's an opportunity then for shipping companies and others that are looking for carbon credits to be looking at the ocean as the place that you help build the carbon credit market. So a kind of a marine-to-marine connection between ocean industries and the ocean as the carbon sequestration opportunity of greatest potential. And just to underline that, if it wasn't for the ocean's role in sequestering carbon and heat, we'd already be in very deep trouble. 50% of roughly of the additional heat generated During the industrial age, 25% of the additional carbon generated, CO2, has been already brought into the ocean ecosystem. There are ways to appropriately enhance that potential, and the ocean industries can play a role both by being a part of that carbon market, and secondly, the companies, and we have a growing industry association prototype amongst the enterprises that are developing carbon sequestration in the ocean. We at the World Ocean Council were facilitating them working together as a group, and they also need, though, the shipping industry as part of the supply chain, the ecosystem, to make it possible to undertake really scaled up carbon sequestration in the ocean. So hugely important situation there in which the shipping and maritime industries can play an important role. The other 3 points I wanted to make a little more quickly here then, in terms of climate change and the ocean and maritime sectors, port and coastal infrastructure adaptation. Clearly, the world's economy cannot function without ports that are operating effectively and are not being put out of operation by extreme weather events, sea level rise, flooding, etc. And so we need a global effort to ensure that we've got infrastructure, not only ports, but associated roads, fuel infrastructure, electrical grids, coastal roads that lead to tourism facilities, low-lying airports. All of this infrastructure needs to be resilient and climate-proof, certainly for all of you in the maritime sector, to be able to undertake your activities. So a collective push, and we have at the World Ocean Council, a global business and investment working group on port and coastal infrastructure adaptation to ensure that we get ahead of the curve on this situation in which ports are increasingly hammered by extreme weather events that are associated with the changing climate and ocean conditions that are upon us. A third point, and Stuart touched on this, offshore renewable energy. Collectively, as a society, we need to ensure that the ocean can play its role in providing low carbon, no carbon energy sources. Wind is, of course, what we know most about because it's been growing fastest over the last decade or two and increasingly moving offshore with floating wind, now creating a really exciting growth in the areas that have the potential to have offshore wind energy, with areas in Asia, South Asia, California, Japan, other areas that have deep coastline or deep nearshore areas really need the floating technology. So that offshore renewable is important for achieving net zero, for developing cleaner fuels, as Stuart mentioned, as something that we collectively need to be working with. And again, business opportunities for the maritime sectors, the ports and shipping industry to be supporting offshore renewables. The last point I want to make in terms of the ocean climate and maritime industry connections is regarding the data, our understanding of the ocean and the atmosphere above the ocean. So 71% of the planet, the largest global common ecosystem after the atmosphere. We need to know a lot more in order to manage it well, to understand the climate and ocean changes taking place. By far the most cost-effective, easily scaled up way in which to learn more about the ocean, the atmospheric interactions going on above the ocean, and the changes underway is by harnessing the role of ships and platforms of opportunity. The many tens of thousands of merchant ships, the 3 to 4 million fishing boats, the 1.2 million kilometers of submarine cable, all of this fixed and mobile infrastructure, and then you add in the wind farms, the aquaculture facilities, all of this fixed and mobile infrastructure has the opportunity to be hosting or deploying sensors which collect the data that help us understand what's going on in the ocean and comes back to you in the maritime industries as in the form of better predictability of extreme weather events, better data on the bridge for weather routing, and other important opportunities for improving the safety and sustainability of shipping operations. So I'd say there's great leadership potential here for the UAE, for the shipping companies in the region here to be taking on board this idea of an opportunity to be hosting and deploying sensors as vessels move around the world and from offshore platforms etc. So I'll stop there. So just wanted to recap there. Carbon reduction in the sea and blue carbon, hugely important to the future of our planet, huge opportunities for the shipping industry, port and coastal infrastructure adaptation, thirdly, offshore renewable energy development, and fourthly, what we call smart ocean, smart industries, data collection from ships and platforms of opportunity. So I'll stop there and pass the microphone over to Catherine Palmer, shipping lead for the UN High-Level Climate Champion Team, to bring her perspectives in. Catherine, great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon, and thank you. It's an honor to be here today to speak to you and to sit on this panel. So I'm speaking to you in my role as the shipping lead for the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions for COP27 and COP28. And I'm here to share some updates on the work that non-party actors across the maritime value chain are doing to accelerate progress towards a zero-emission, equitable and resilient maritime sector by 2050. So our work through the 2030 breakthroughs, the breakthrough agenda that was launched in Glasgow at COP26, and the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda that was agreed at COP27, together with the Marrakesh Partnership Climate Action Pathways, provide a roadmap of the key milestones and actions that are needed this decade to get us on track to deliver the transformational change that we need and to provide that direction of travel of which all actors across the maritime value chain can really converge around, and we can use this roadmap as a means of tracking progress, checking against real action that is taking place on the ground, and readjusting and working out where we need to take further action, where we need to ramp up and accelerate in order to be able to achieve our goals. So advancing the maritime transition requires a rapid scaling of action to make zero-emission ships the default choice by 2030 and to put the sector on a 1.5 aligned trajectory. So our 2030 breakthrough goal is at least 5% zero-emission fuels in international shipping and 15% in domestic shipping. So this equates to around 5.5 million tons of green hydrogen-derived fuel by 2030. And then that would be followed by a rapid acceleration and scaling through the 2030s to achieve around a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, with zero-emission shipping by at least 2050. And that's what a 1.5 aligned trajectory looks like, from aligning with the IPCC science. But this transition requires a whole system approach. So it's not just about the fuels and the ships. We also need to enable a just transition, whereby 450,000 seafarers need to be retrained and upskilled by 2030, and that rapidly scales to around 800,000 by the mid-2030s. And we also need to advance the resilience agenda, so that at least 30% of global maritime trade moves through climate-adapting ports by 2030. So as a sector who is vital to sustainable growth, can continue to connect people and supply chains across all regions, all communities, and all cities and ports. And also we need to protect and enhance local coastal and ocean ecosystems and implement equity-focused social programs. And climate action in the real world is happening. We are actually seeing results. So we've already heard from speakers today talking about practical action that is happening. You know, ship owners are ordering zero-emission vessels, with the first on the water this year, and we've seen a significant uptick in the order book for zero-emission capable vessels this year. In fact, 24 were ordered in just the first 2 months of this year. We've seen cargo owners, customers coming together to send significant market demand signals for zero-emission ocean freight. And they're looking to accelerate the commercial deployment of zero-emission maritime services through the Zero Emission Buyers Alliance for Maritime and the Cargo Owners Zero Emission Vessels Initiative. And green hydrogen producers have also pledged to supply sizable shares of the 5.5 million tonnes that maritime needs to meet the 2030 breakthrough goal of 5%. And in fact, if we look at existing commitments that are made by the largest green hydrogen producing companies who are members of the Green Hydrogen Catapult, there is enough commitment made to supply 90% of the green hydrogen needed by the shipping sector by 2030. So what are the analysis and the data is showing that in order to achieve the 5%, there are significant enough commitments made to achieve 2030, but then it's from 2030 to 2040 onwards where we need to unlock more investment into the production and supply of green hydrogen-derived fuels. And that's exactly why a 2030 target is critical for this sector. And we've also seen a number of green corridor consortiums emerged since the launch of the Clydebank Declaration at COP26. And they're all on track to be able to achieve the goal of at least 6 implemented by the middle of this decade. And the initiative that Stuart's spoken about, the Clean Energy Maritime Hubs, is another practical action initiative on the ground. And we can connect the Clean Energy Maritime Hubs with the green corridors. So those import-export routes of clean energy around the world are by decarbonised shipping routes. So this momentum sends a significant, strong positive signal from the non-state actors to the governments in support of ambitious climate policy. And 2023 is a critical year for determining whether international shipping will be part of the climate solution. And now is the time to really put shipping on a 1.5 aligned trajectory with ambitious 2030 and 2040 targets. And so I would say, if we really want to mobilize change this year, what are the 3 most powerful things that we can do? First of all, it is around leveraging the supply and demand opportunities across the green hydrogen and green shipping sectors to really build confidence in the supply and availability of zero-emission fuels and demonstrate the national opportunities in clean energy production for growth and investment, and show that the maritime sector is a high-quality, first mover demand market for taking those green fuels. Secondly, I would say that we need to ensure a just and equitable transition at both the country and workforce levels, and we can show how this can work in practice through the design of policy and through our business decisions. So we ensure that we are inclusive in our first mover projects, we transfer knowledge and build capacity, and we design measures that address the needs of the most climate vulnerable so no one is left behind. And thirdly, I would say we need to accelerate the pace and scale of the resilience transition. Maritime infrastructure is increasingly exposed to shocks and stresses and the risks of highly consequential disruptions in service, including from climate change. So we need to ensure that our role in society continues to provide supply chains and infrastructure that is resilient to the communities, ports and cities across all regions that we serve. So we have a unique opportunity this year, both with the critical policy decisions at MEPC in July and also with the global stocktake at COP28 later on this year, where we need to put action and solution at the heart of these discussions. So I've set out what climate action is actually happening in the maritime sector, but the race is well and truly on. So we need to move further and faster. We have over 11,000 companies in the race to zero who collectively have committed to halve emissions by 2030. And maritime really needs to do its share as well. And governments can use this as a strong vote of confidence for bold, ambitious, and effective policies that provide the clarity that we need to unlock further near-term investments so that shipping's transition can be fair, inclusive, and the opportunities within the global south realized. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm here for the rest of the week and look forward to be able to speak to you about how non-state and non-party stakeholders can continue to help towards these collective goals. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Right. Well, a lot to unpack there, so we'll come to that in a few minutes. So in the meantime, first we'll have Neil Robertson-Jones, Head of Corporate Banking at the National Bank of Gujarat. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. So first of all, we've discussed what it is we would like to do. Now we're going to look at how it could be financed. So in the first instance, I'll look at some general options of potential financing and then concentrate a little more on the banks. So I would imagine that the government could allocate, I'm talking about UAE at this point in time, a portion of its budget to cover their near and mid-term aspirations to finance the UAE's alternative energy infrastructure and to help progress in the transition to clean energy. So looking at government funding first, this could take the form of direct investment in specific projects. It could be the provision of subsidies or grants or tax incentives to domestic and foreign investors. Equally, there could be specific established government funds or entities to oversee and support specific renewable projects. Alternatively and additionally, PPPs, public-private partnerships, this would be the UAE working with the private sector to share in the financing whilst leveraging the private sector's expertise and resources for specific project financings. This, I think, is a huge opportunity to solicit significant inward investment which could help accelerate the establishment of renewable infrastructure and progress towards clean energy transition. Then we have the international financing institutions. Here I'm looking at the World Bank, IFC, IMF, multilaterals, institutions, regional and development banks. We're also seeing globally now green bonds, wherein capital is being raised for renewable projects, and climate funds established by international agreements, for example, the Green Climate Fund. Then we're looking at FDI, foreign direct investment, and this, I think, can be encouraged by providing an enabling environment. So, for example, in the UAE, we already have a very stable legal framework and political framework. We could be simplifying regulations, providing investment incentives, promoting partnerships with international companies. All this could solicit greater FDI. And then local banks, for example, National Bank of Fujairah, we're providing loans, credit facilities, bonding, and specific investment products tailored to the needs of the alternative energy sector. And these banks could also collaborate directly with government in specialized financings for renewables to encourage further investment in the field. There are also energy performance contracts wherein private companies or investors put up their capital for renewable energy projects in exchange for the provision of the utilization of energy that's being created. This is sort of pretty much similar to distributed generation, where we've done lots of photovoltaic installations on top of warehousing and businesses throughout the UAE. So then apart from that, there's crowdfunding and community investment, but I can't really see that progressing here as well. So coming to the banks specifically, I think the banks are progressing now more and more in accordance with the Poseidon principles. This is basically a framework established by major global banks to assess and disclose the climate alignment of their shipping portfolios. So this is encouraging all banks to be increasingly aligned. So the aim is to support decarbonization by integrating climate considerations in all your projects evaluation and lending decisions, and so encouraging the adoption of sustainable practices. So in relation to the financings now, we have new criteria established for evaluating shipping projects, individual projects, and determining the environmental impact of vessels. There's also more incentives for investment in clean energy technologies and environmentally friendly vessels. So the principles, Poseidon principles, also foster collaboration, greater collaboration amongst banks which is helping to provide best practice within the financing market. And also the risk management with the greater transparency within banks in assessing and disclosing their climate risks also helps other banks related to where they look at their carbon-intensive assets and how better they might align their lending with climate goals, which then obviously encourages clean energy solutions and promotes the transition to sustainability. And then apart from that, we have technology adoption. So banks may prioritize low or neutral carbon technologies. We're doing alternative fuels, energy efficient vessels, renewable energy installations on ships to accelerate decarbonization as well. And then on the general stakeholder engagement, the banks are supporting and incentivizing local and international maritime players transitioning to cleaner technologies. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dale. So clearly the finance is a big part of making this whole transition happen. So maybe to start off the discussion here, and one of the questions on Slido was about the top 3 challenges, and Catherine, you finished up by laying out 3 challenges, or 3 sort of key points. The last one, which was accelerating. So just a point of departure for me on this, 15 years ago, we tried at the World Ocean Council to get a group of funders interested in the decarbonization of shipping, and the proposing that a voluntary effort by a collection of leadership companies from the shipping industry is ready to go. This was in 2008 or so, and people didn't believe that the industry would voluntarily start to do something as difficult and challenging as this. So it's been great to see what's been happening in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But then back to your final point, Catherine, the acceleration. Is enough happening soon enough, fast enough, from any of your perspectives, that we're going to get to even the breakthrough target? Are we getting there well enough? And what's going to be the message then at COP28 from the shipping industry, that there's clearly a lot of progress, but is it on track to meet expectations out there?
Well, I think from the point of view of the shipping companies, what you're finding is that the larger players, they are moving, they're doing first mover, yeah, and the smaller ones are not. But one of the difficulties is that we've said, and we discussed I think yesterday, was the fact that everybody wants to go green straight away, but at the moment we only have sufficient vessels to accommodate the current requirements at this point in time. So the newer, the bigger companies will continue to go after the zero carbon or low carbon as much as possible, but the existing vessels will continue using probably the same stuff until they finish, because otherwise there won't be enough, and you can't retrofit. And as we said before, we're confident in the technology that we have that will make the difference by 2030, 2050, but those energies are not available at this point in time, with the exception of LNG, I guess.
Right.
I'd probably look at it slightly differently. We're going to have to, we need first movers in order to be able to achieve the breakthrough goal, or the 2030 goal. But the point is, it is not about leaving anyone behind. When we want the mass market to move, that's when we need the regulation. So the regulation will enable the mass market. But the first movers, it is about collaboration, and it's also about not leaving anyone behind. So this is collaborating in a very different way to how we have collaborated in the maritime sector before, in the sense that we will share, much more sharing of learnings and findings. So if as a smaller company you cannot participate in a Green Corridor consortium, for example, because you don't have the resource, you don't have to be able at the time to commit to that, you can still benefit from what is happening in these first mover projects, because we have much more openness around the collaboration that is taking place. And we also need to collaborate, or we use the term kind of radical collaboration, and we sort of say that this is very much about collaborating across boundaries, across value chains, across regions, and it's very much, accepting, you've got a common goal, but everyone views the world differently. And that kind of collaboration is very different. And so we have to do this on unprecedented levels in order to be able to, for the first movers, to be those test beds, to try things, to demonstrate the value of public-private partnerships, to try new business models, to be able to, like you said, signal demand and things like this. But then we want to make sure that no one gets left behind, so that we share that learning with everyone and we make it much more open platforms, is what I would say for collaboration. And then when we want everyone to move together, that's when you use regulation in that mass market movement.
Neil, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, well,
sorry, Stuart.
Yeah, I think the finance piece is vital, and it was really interesting. The event that we held in Glasgow, the minister, if you remember, the last minister from Chile came along and was talking about the grand plans that Chile had got. So we got excited about this, and we thought we better do some research, because you can't build a financial plan on press releases. You've got to understand. So we commissioned the Tyndall Centre for Climate Research out of the University of Manchester, look at all these grand plans. Unfortunately, only 4% are at final investment decision process. So, it makes it more difficult to really start to invest, and that's why we want the hubs process, because it then de-risks that infrastructure, so you have exposure. Because there's no point thinking about transporting fuels if there's no smelting industry preparing for that, but the smelting industry is not preparing, because so chickens and eggs. So, I think that's an important part to unlock the finance. And to Catherine's point about leaving no one behind, I think this is really valuable. It's a leadership that the UAE have already shown through Masdar and other investments as well, that knowledge is going to be needed throughout the world. What we're talking about is a massive scaling up at a speed that we haven't seen. In the past, militaries, Singapore is a bunkering hub because the British Navy decided it wanted one there. We don't have that ability, so we are looking at how do we move, not sequentially but in parallel, at rapid speed. And that's why we need to understand the scale, and that the expertise that probably will start here, and we are seeing that start here, will need to be looking at how you then empower Africa. Then you bring in the regional development banks, probably better equipped than the World Bank, because they're slow, and obviously politics is, to start de-risking funding pipelines, so that you can create not think about what traditionally happens. And I know, because I used to be at the UN doing this, you create some small decentralized energy system that maybe helps power a community to create some economy, to create economic value for the country eventually. Now you've got the opportunity to create massive infrastructure projects with generation, production of fuels, then that will be transported throughout the world for the power sector, all these other sectors, and will also create the bunkering infrastructure that not only the corridors need, but the whole world needs for, we want to understand how the energy system or the fuel system works for the shipping industry. So I think there is opportunity for us as an industry, rather than just to be seen, we'll wait and be a servant. No, let's get on the front foot and be part of catalyzing that transition, because those first movers, and we can talk about some of the things that will come out of the IMO as well, have the opportunity to get in early and make some money as well, because that's what business is about, right?
We're a significant demand market. We look at green steel, we look at green hydrogen, all the other economy sectors of transition, and we're a demand market. So why not sort of step up and say, well, if you're going to produce that green hydrogen, we want to be the first ones to have it. Why sit back and wait for another sector to go in and buy it? So I think that's what why shipping is quite an interesting sector to other markets, because we're a good quality market. We're growing. We've got longevity, so when these other economy sectors are looking, where am I going to sell my green hydrogen to? They're looking to us, but they want that certainty from this market. So I just say, if we want it, then we can go and get it. But I totally agree about the investment piece, because green corridors will stay green corridors on paper unless we get finance, and that's why I think the value of public-private partnerships, because it's not all going to be private sector finance that is going to bring things to fruition. But I think, making sure that, when we do these first mover projects, they are investable. Because then we can take something to people to say, look, it's investable, you get a good return on it.
But it seems like then in that sense, and with particularly with who we had speaking here and the sort of the host here, the infrastructure side of it, as opposed to the vessels, in terms of the shore infrastructure, is that how are those signals from the shipping industry and this great market, for example, for green hydrogen, is that getting transmitted enough to then the governments and the port developers who essentially need to then, and the investors that need to support that infrastructure development? Are those communications happening? Are we getting the critical mass of market being the shipping industry being communicated to the infrastructure developers to de-risk and facilitate that investment moving forward?
I'd say yes, but probably not at the scale that it's probably needed. COP27, there was a joint statement issued by green hydrogen producers and shipping demand companies, committing, like I said, to come together to say that we'll supply it and we'll take it. But I think where the level of uncertainty, how do we now advance that? How do we operationalize that? And we have to operationalize that by going into the kind of offtake agreements, but then there's still an element of uncertainty. And I think that's where the policy signal is expected to take out an element of that uncertainty.
Oh, yeah, I think Stuart.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because shipping industry has relied working with transport ministries, and unfortunately transport ministries don't normally have a lot of sway within government. We're fortunate with the UAE because the infrastructure ministry and the energy ministry are able to think more strategically than many, which is why for the hubs we're focusing not on transport ministries, but that is only part of them. You've got a planning ministry. You've got to align the incentives of ports, which are often owned by a municipality. They then on top of that have an operator who's incentivized in a certain way. You then have to think about the planning regimes about whether you want ammonia or methanol bunkering or massive infrastructure right next to your school. So, there needs to be some more strategic thought, and I think this is part of a growing knowledge base and exchange of knowledge, which I think is vital that we need to be working on, because if we talk in silos all the time, and we're here in the shipping industry talking to ourselves, that's great, but it's never going to move it because the shipping industry represents an element of the value chain. So we have to bring those people together to start moving. And the work that Catherine's been doing is important, really, within that, to highlight that to all of those sectors and to governments, and hopefully we can all play our part. Yeah,
and that leadership needs to be happening at all those different components, kind of at the same time and at the same speed and scale. And so it seems like here at UAE, there's really been a significant taking on board that challenge. Would you agree, Neil, that there's really leadership happening here that can transmit to other locations?
Well, I think that the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure have led the way, because they're talking with their other government departments all the time. So whichever government department is, they are doing that liaison. And I think what will probably happen is, if you could get some form of UAE agreement for all those ports to be working together and to be under a framework, not necessarily imposed, but encouraged to be able to everybody working together, because then you could get, in effect, like a green corridor for just the ports around here in the UAE in the first instance, and then you could learn from that and how that develops, and then you could extend that through the region, through the Middle East region. And I think that's something that once it's worked and been shown to work, I think the benefits will be huge. Then you can have sort of support vessels all being powered by batteries or something within the port. So that if you did that for the whole of the UAE, that would make a significant reduction in the carbon footprint of the business.
So there's a level of sort of commitment and coordination to really put the pieces together here that could be...
But collusively, because I know the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, they are talking directly with different municipalities or states within the UAE, in order to basically to encourage them to think and consider more on a federal basis, but I'm not impinging on anybody's autonomy.
And so how does, Catherine and Stuart, so how does the global shipping industry then work with these regional sort of government-led initiatives to make sure that these are happening in a way that's going to be compatible on a global scale?
I think that your point about getting ports to work together, I think it's really interesting, because they are fiercely competitive. You know, we in the shipping industry are fiercely competitive, so are they, and they don't like sharing. And we have to provide ways to bring people together for the greater good, but for economic opportunity. Because I think that's where I think the scale piece is so important.
Right.
You know, we don't talk enough about it. You know, even if we talk about what Catherine's talking about for some of the ships, you're going to need 1.2 terawatt hours of energy. Now that's what we're talking about is what the nuclear industry is for the world. Now that, great opportunity. So I think that it's changing that mindset from it being an extra cost to an opportunity, and then you see things move. I worked with the ministry when I was in the energy sector, and the UAE absolutely see this as a strategic opportunity, and have clever things in terms of how you charge for or remunerate energy efficiency and put escalators on more power usage. So they're actually a very progressive ministry in thinking of those future things. But it is difficult to get people to work together when you have a very cost optimized industry and regulation which is specifically designed to, and quite rightly, stop anti-competitive actions. So again, there is a challenge to get people to work together in a non-competitive way that doesn't impact competitive nature of business, which then leads to other issues.
And all of you have mentioned one way or the other regulation and the role of regulation in being setting the floor on this and maybe creating the push and the demand. So how this balance then between both the regulatory process and then we've got one of the Slido points about more market measures, carbon tax. I'm struggling to read the fine print from here. But the carbon tax, so where do this balance then? So how's that going to move with these national and regional and corridor initiatives in relation to a globally necessary either market incentive driven or market driven, market-based incentives, or the regulatory process? I mean, is that going to become an impediment, or are we seeing that piece is coming together well enough? Catherine, on the regulatory side, what's your thinking?
I'm not really quite sure of the question, but I think
is the regulatory framework emerging well enough at an international level to facilitate the transition here?
So we shouldn't forget about. I mean, this is going to be about regional action and international action are both needed. It's not an either or. It's going to be a combination of both, and and I think regionally and nationally, countries can move quicker than internationally to put in place mechanisms that would incentivize the transition. And so I think your idea of a regional program for decarbonizing the maritime sector, I think is really great initiative and a really great idea, because we do need that regional action as well as international. So I wouldn't sort of say let's put all our eggs in international basket.
But they've got to be compatible, right?
It depends, because at a country level you can provide the incentive much more on the upstream, on the supply demand and the supply production side. So it doesn't matter, because the IMO is not going to so you can put things together that kind of
at less than international scale,
at a combination that creates the right incentives across the whole value chain. So but I think at an international level it's a critical year. Who knows what's going to happen in July? And I don't think anyone on this panel would want to predict what was going to happen.
Stuart's chomping at the bit here to say something about
No,
this.
well, I think that you're right. We need all of the above. Ernie Moniz used to call it. Yeah, we've got various proposals to the IMO to create a market-based measure. That others have as well. It is a critical year. We are looking at raising the levels of ambition, and ICS was the first trade association to call for a net zero position by 2050 to try and create some clarity. We have put through a market incentive proposal, hopefully to bring some of the countries together, and we are in a place. Paul, you've been part of UNFCCC processes, so have I in the past, and it's a microcosm of that. You have countries that are far apart. They will come to a space. Hopefully, we're trying to help facilitate that. I'm sure you are as well, Catherine. And we're hoping that maybe our proposal, which sets a scale of price, probably not the scale that everyone wants, but will create a fund which will then reimburse those first movers. So effectively creating a larger market price differential, which then makes it more cost effective to work, where other countries are bulking at such a high starting price that they will kill everything. So we're hoping that some solution will come. There are other things that are coming through at the moment as well, but it is a horse trading moment at the moment. But let's hope we get some clarity.
Yeah, I think the kind of desired outcome, and I would say, if from a non-state actor perspective, if we're sort of saying what are those key policy asks, it is the levels of ambition for zero. It's the levels of ambition in the revised strategy around zero emission by at least 2050 with ambitious 2030, 2040 targets. It's the well to wake kind of whole life cycle perspective, and also to make sure that just an equitable transition is within the strategy. But then, we know that there is agreement on a technical and an economic measure as part of the package of regulation. So then it's just ensuring that the timeline on the development and adoption of those is retained, really. We wouldn't want the timeline to slip.
And is that, Neil, in terms of the finance community, is that enough for people to feel confident about where this is all going?
I'm not exactly sure. Confident? Yeah, I think there's an inevitability about it, and I think it's certainly accelerating. I think everybody's much more focused now than they were, and the early adopters, if there can be incentivized, as you're suggesting, I think that could be the game changer, because incentivization and encouragement is better than or more palatable to many. So if you do the incentivization and then it helps the biggest players as well as the smaller players, to your point, then obviously that's more people being engaged and more people progressing. And then I think it'll just develop a momentum, and then it'll just be moving inexorably, because there will be no point in continuing with the old machinery. Yeah, you just have to accelerate on decarbonization.
Yeah, and as this moves forward, and there's been a couple of questions about different fuel types, which there's been lots of discussion about this over the years, and one of them was about LNG, and we don't have to think back too far in the past when we were all talking about LNG as a transition fuel, but you rarely hear that anymore. And then there's another question just popped up about methanol, and then we heard about the number of methanol vessels under construction or being in the order books, and the slower progress, but still progress in moving towards the hydrogen vessels. Is the fuel choice a dominant part of the equation here, or is it just a matter of, kind of, to Neil's term, inevitability? Some fuel of appropriate technical and performance standards, et cetera, will come forward, and that's not really the key part of the discussion at this point?
I think, as my slide showed, there's still a lot of uncertainty about what that future will be. You know, we've heard that, you know, there's a lot of play from some companies towards methanol, some other companies are elsewhere. What we're seeing, looking at the broader picture, hydrogen production is effectively turning into ammonia. So you have here in the Gulf region Aquapower, who Saudi's renewable company, working with Oman to produce 1.2 million tons of ammonia. So it's produced from hydrogen into ammonia because it can be transported. Going for power sector in Germany, they're doing between 5 and 10 million tons of ammonia. You know, that's not exactly the most sensible way of going about things, but it's the most pragmatic way of things because of the losses in the system. It may be, you know, from my energy hat, it may be that the scale of what the fuels would be may drive the shipping sector because we are a relatively small player. Mm-hmm. But there may be specificities, and I think the safety implications, which we heard from ABS, and you know, are going to be important. You know, I know that there are some energy companies that won't even touch ammonia because of the consequences it will have for others. Some ship owners won't touch it, but others think it's future. So I think we're still very early in that, and that's why I think understanding the broader perspective is going to be important. But there might be winners and losers, you know, and I think that's a
transition.
It's a reality in any industry, I guess. But,
I think it's important to say that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we're not going to all transition to use the same fuel. You know, so different ship types, different trades, different markets are going to find the solution that works for them. I think it's, rather than asking the question of what fuel, it's like what do we want that fuel to be able to do? And I think that's why understanding the greenhouse gas intensity of the life cycle of fuel and setting, you know, the expectations for the market around that, and sort of saying, you know, so if you went out to the market and said, you know, I want a fuel that is less than or equal to whatever greenhouse gas intensity, producers will make it in the same way, you know, so set a fuel standard rather than sort of saying which fuel, and the market will respond.
We could be looking at the CCS future as a transition, you never know. CCS could be part of the mix. There's lots of research going into that. And I'm not saying that that's for the long term, but that could be an option as well in terms of short term.
Yeah. Yeah, and for individual companies, and there was a question or two that came up about carbon credits and whether that's a part of the mix, and certainly companies will be looking at how they're going to create a net zero future for themselves in a number of different ways that may be a part of the transition as well, outside of the fuels and the energy sources themselves.
I think I would probably say no out-of-sector offsets. And I think if we look at all the interventions that have been made at the last rounds of negotiations from the countries that were present, I think there might have been a majority for no out-of-sector offsets.
Yeah. Just in the little bit of time we have left, there was also a question about COP28 itself and how companies can participate. I've got some thoughts on a broader scale, but I don't know if you want to mention something about that, Catherine.
Come and see me. There's lots. I mean, I think, as I said, the real role that we can play as non-state actors is really showing practical solution and action that is happening in the real economy, and being able to put that on the ground at COP28. And so looking for those progressive actors that are taking action, you know, I think the platform is open for people to be able to take part if we've got real action to show that that the real economy actors are doing something.
Yeah. Did you want to add?
Yeah, really, I highlighted one of the things we did in Glasgow was try and bring the industry together to, you know, come and find some ideas. We want to do that. It's not ICS, this is the industry coming together. So we're working with the Ports Association, who've got their event in Abu Dhabi earlier on, to bring forward ideas with, things that Catherine's working on. We want this to be a celebration, but also how do we make that work together? And then I know working with the UAE and working with Catherine's team, how do we showcase that within the UNFCCC to, I worked with Christiana before Paris, and you can never expect to change negotiations by turning up on the day, but hopefully that catalyzes other things for future COPs as well, and that's important.
Yeah. We have there's a whole space around global climate action, and that space is really to demonstrate the climate action that is taking place in the real world. And so I think that we really want to make sure that maritime is front and center of being showing what is actually happening.
So whoever asked the question, come and talk to Catherine and myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to close up, I'll add to that from the World Ocean Council point of view, as has come out here in the panel, a lot of these things interact with other sectors, clearly ports, energy, and more broadly renewable energy. And then when we look at the bigger ocean climate connections, the relationship of shipping and maritime industries to many of the other industries operating in the ocean. And so from our part at the World Ocean Council, we work to bring together the broad spectrum of the ocean business community, investment community around ocean climate, as well as broader sustainability issues. And so we have a process for engaging in the COP system and the COP process for the leadership community overall in the ocean industries. And that's, if that's of interest, happy to provide more information on that to anyone. There'll certainly be a lot of the run-up, as you're saying, Stuart. You don't just show up and if you want to make a difference. So there's some great people here to engage with, some great organizations, and we're all here to help companies, because it's really the company input, the expertise, the knowledge that really is necessary, I think, to give the credibility, the strength, the energy to what the organizations can do to help shape policy in this really crucial climate discussion in this crucial year. And very fortunate to have the leadership from Dubai and really helping pull so many things together this year. So with that, join me in thanking the panel, and feel free to engage any of us later. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to everybody on the panel, and thank you to everybody in the audience. I think we can all agree we've heard some excellent insights and information this morning, and that's just the start. We have over 100 speakers, as we heard earlier today, that will be taking part in the content programme over the coming days, and we look forward to seeing you attend those sessions, which will either be in here or in the breakout theatre, which is at the other side of the exhibition hall. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of Seatrade Maritime Logistics Middle East and the UAE Maritime Week. Thank you all.